Good morning, everyone. See, maybe we'll get started now. I am James Pfeiffer. I'm the Executive Director of the Regional Water Authority. I think we sent out a notice to the board members that it would be a special board meeting. It's really a coffee and chat. It's our next installment of coffee and chat this morning. This is a program that we're trying out this year. We'll be switching up the format as the year goes on. So the first one we had was in January, and that was our awards ceremony. Today we're going to have some panel discussions, and I'm really excited about that. But I'm going to tee it up this way. The state and our region are facing significant challenges right now, and they will be in the future. There's currently a housing shortage in California. Separately, we're trying to deal with climate change and the floods, fires, and droughts that accompany that. It's looking like it's going to be a dry year this year. But we can develop solutions to these problems. Indeed, this region has made investments in water supply reliability that help us with the dry year conditions this year. Today, we have 4 speakers discussing 3 projects that will bring solutions to this region. I'm happy to announce our 4 distinguished speakers who are really responsible for implementing projects that are crucial to our region. They include Jerry Brown, Executive Director of the Sites Project Authority and former General Manager of the Contra Costa Water District. He will be here today to talk about the Sites project. James Corliss is the Executive Director of Sacog, and he will be joining us to discuss Green Means Go. Tony Ferenzi, who is the Manager of Strategic Affairs at Placer County Water Agency, and Charles Duncan, who is the CEO of West Jost Associates, will be joining us to discuss River Arc. Again, all these projects have a real regional significance and a piece of the puzzle to becoming resilient within the region. So I'm going to turn this over to Jerry Brown and make him a presenter. All right, Jerry, take it away, please.
Thanks, Jim. I don't know the reason, but my camera is not working. So I apologize to everyone and for that, but I'm going to try to share my screen. I am not able to share my screen. So Jim, our backup plan was somebody was going to run the slides for me. So I'd appreciate it if we could do that.
I will do that, Jerry. Hang on just a second.
Thanks. And while Jim's bringing those up, I'll go ahead and make some introductory remarks. Thank you all for having me today, talking about this very important project. Many of you are friends, and it's good to see you all again. And I hope you're all doing well and are safe, and your families are healthy. What a crazy water year this is becoming and is upon us, and definitely reminds us how important projects like the Sites Reservoir are to our water future, securing the water future for our communities. 2020 was a really important year for the Sites project. I came on board about a year ago, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that have transpired since then and got us to where we were at that point. We got some renewed commitment from all of our partners. We went through a funding round for local agency funding and were able to secure all 21 participants and added 2 additional participants in the project. So now we have 23 investors, plus the state of California through the Prop 1 program, and got a determination of feasibility from the Bureau of Reclamation at the end of last year, which means the federal government can be an investor up to 25% cost share of the project, and that's significant and very significant for the Sacramento area, which I'll talk a little bit more about when we get to that point. We went through a right-sizing effort, strategic planning, all parts of really planning for our future and setting us up for success for 2021 and beyond. And So what I'd like to do now is just kind of walk you through a little bit about where we are with the project, maybe not get into all the details. Have a few slides today that describe some of the operational effects that I thought you all would be interested in the Sacramento area. And so let's get started. Jim, next slide, please. As a context for why we need to move forward with the site's reservoir, it's important that we looked at the mounting water management challenges across the state. These are probably very familiar to everyone in this room. And, you know, these are challenges that are upon us and are expected to become more severe as in the years to come. It's safe to say that every community in California faces one or multiples of these challenges in managing water for their future communities. And really the challenge for us as water managers is identifying a portfolio of measures that can be taken to prepare and adapt to these conditions. The term all of the above approach has been thrown around a lot, and I believe that that probably is our best chances of success in my experience as a water manager. I wanted to share a little insight, you know, focusing specifically on what sites can do. If we had the site's reservoir in a year like we're experiencing right now, there would be an additional 1 million acre-feet of water in secure off-stream storage for our farms, cities, and the environment. This is substantial. This is meaningful. This is badly needed when we look at our situation today and the situation of the future. Next slide, please. One of the unique features of the project is the broad statewide participation that we have. We have folks from the North State, from the south of our state, from the Bay Area, from the San Joaquin Valley, from the mountain regions, coastal areas. We really have a broad and diverse group of folks that are participating. I was, you know, part of Contra Costa Water District in the Bay Area, and we were, of course, working really hard to develop the second expansion of the Los Vaqueros Reservoir. And at that time, we were working with the 9 different agencies within the Bay Area. For the sites project, we have, as I said, 23 investor agencies and 9 agencies, irrigation agencies and counties that are part of the Joint Powers Authority. So we have a very large group of folks that are part of governing our project, and it's really remarkable. Next slide, please. To witness the diversity and the ability of that group to work cooperatively and in partnership to build this project. It's really a pretty magnificent thing when you think about all the regional and agency conflicts that exist across water in California. These agencies do a tremendous job and are really focused on a shared purpose of getting this project built, both for the benefit of their individual agencies, but for the benefit of the state as a whole. Next slide, please. I mentioned we went through a right-sizing process, and this project has been a long time in the making. It's been 6 decades now that since it was first introduced in the California Water Plan back in 1957. About 10 years ago, the Joint Powers Authority of the local agencies started and really established the governance and the direction for the project. There was a draft EIR that was issued in 2017 for a larger project than is on the table today. And the 2018 WSIP, the Prop 1 application, included that larger project. We were awarded $816 million through that process. And through that full effort, we were able to get quite a bit of feedback and reaction to that project, and we took that into account. We looked at what the project was going to cost, and essentially took a pause and said, okay, we need to reconfigure things so that we can afford the project, get it permitted, and actually get it built within a reasonable amount of time. And that's what was done as part of the right sizing effort. And all of our efforts now going forward are really based on and premised on this very important work that was done. Next slide, please. This map is a location map and shows the current configuration of the project. Thank you. Most notable here for those of you that are familiar with the project is the elimination of what was called the Delavan Pipeline, which ran about 15 miles from the reservoir to the river. That was a very controversial piece, and it was going to be a new diversion in the river. And after we looked at it, we felt that this was probably the most significant change we could make to actually get us on the right track. Eliminating this feature does reduce the output of the project, but it allows us to proceed without this local and environmental opposition to that element. So now we're using mostly existing conveyance infrastructure, with one small exception. We're calling the Dunnigan Pipeline, which is down in the lower right of this map, and it's about 4 miles of 10-foot diameter pipe to convey the water from the Tamacalusa Canal over to the Calusa Basin drain and back down into the river. We still have a very large reservoir to store water, and we're still operating in a manner where we're capturing the wettest of flows in the Sacramento River and storing them for the dry periods. Next slide, please. Looking at the outputs and benefits of the project, that's what this slide shows. We've used our most current assumptions and operations. You know, there's a lot of controversy and a lot of activity around flows and conditions, particularly in the Delta, and so we've used those to update these numbers. The real benefit here is shown in the lower right, where you can see the dry year output. This is all new water to the system, so that's substantial. And most notable here too is the fact that the participants, including the environment, will have its own dedicated storage space in the reservoir. And each of the participants, including the environment, will be able to manage that space and the associated proportionate share of water in a way that best suits their needs. And I would just say on this point that, you know, as a project, we know that the success of our project, including the environmental benefits, really depends on the health of the river system. And so we see ourselves as becoming a constructive partner in the stewardship over that important resource. And so we're really in it for the long haul. This is a 100-year project. Next slide, please. And we know that our success is dependent on the success of the river, and we're here to make sure that the river is maintained and sustainable. This slide talks about costs and affordability. And all these numbers are based on the value planning results. Since then, we've done quite a bit of feasibility analysis, including some geotechnical evaluations on various private properties throughout the project area. So all of that information is being collated and brought together to help us review and analyze these costs a little bit closer. So we're in the process of updating this right now. We'll be coming out with some updated information later this year. And I would just say on this point, you know, that large projects are very difficult to put into the context of today. You know, a lot of people look at this and say, holy cow, this is really expensive. Well, investing in a 100-year project like a reservoir like this, it requires a real vision for the future and a real understanding of what a long-term investment really means. Next slide, please. I wanted to mention the local flood protection benefits. Of course, these are very localized. This is the Maxwell community here in the picture. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about atmospheric rivers. And I think one of the things that sites allows us to do is allows us to help convert these liabilities, these atmospheric rivers in terms of flood, from a liability into an asset, because we're going to be able to pick up a lot of that water. Those are the times when we're actually diverting the water and storing it into the reservoir, and that's having the reservoir is helping us to take some of the load off of the river during those trying periods. Sites is like a savings account. It's capturing water when it's plentiful and saving it for when we need it. And I would also mention here that it's complementary to our other water infrastructure in the state, like Shasta, Norville, and Folsom. It means that we're not in competition for the same resource, and instead, having the reservoir adds to our water management capabilities for all of these state features. Next slide, please. Economic benefits are huge. These will spill over not just to the direct region, but also to the Sacramento area. We've done some estimates. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, one more. We've done some estimates, and we're looking at more than 10,000 jobs supported through the construction of the site's reservoir. This is millions and millions of dollars coming to the region. Very beneficial to the Colusa and Glenn County areas, and we're working with those areas to ensure that those community benefits are long-lasting and really improve the area as opposed to taking away from it. And a lot of this will spill over into the Sacramento area as well, your areas. Next slide, please. Some of the key milestones are shown here for this year that we're in. We're really working aggressively to meet the Prop 1 deadline. The requirement to have a draft EIR, a feasibility determination, and a 75% local cost share commitment by the end of this year. We're on track to meet those requirements, and we'll be putting out a revised EIS in August to describe the right size project, and all of these things are helping us to achieve our goal of an affordable, permittable, and buildable project. Next slide. This diagram has the schedule for the project on the top, goes out through 2030. We have an in-service date projected to 2030. 6-year construction period. The chart on the bottom is the cash flow diagram, annual cash flows. You see us starting in 2022, ramping up pretty substantially, and peaking out in about 5 or 6 years. And the next big milestone is the water rights application and the securing a water right. We anticipate doing so by the end or by the middle of 2023. And the way we have this configured right now is that's about the same time we would be initiating our bank financing for the project. Next slide, please. The next few slides really just talk a little bit about the EIR and some of the operations analysis that our fantastic project team is undertaking right now. This describes the 3 different alternatives that are being analyzed in our EIR. Probably of most significant difference here is the level of federal involvement. We have what's called Alt 1B. You can see that column. That's a smaller 7% cost share of federal involvement, and you have Alt 3, which is 25% cost share. And I think this is where the Sacramento region should be really paying close attention, and we're working closely with the agencies that are participating to really ensure that the Bureau's involvement is of benefit to the Folsom operation and the American River operation. That's very important to us, and while we don't control that as a project, we want to work cooperatively with the Sacramento region to make sure that the Bureau's actions and involvements are supportive of improving those conditions. Next slide, please. These next few are really graphs, probably get into the details, but the engineers out there might really enjoy these. Really here, main thing is to show off to the left the chart that illustrates when we're diverting water, mostly in the period from about December through April. You can see that peak. And then off to the right there, you see what the amounts are in the different types of water years and our annual averages on the chart down below. We are looking at this under climate conditions as well. Next slide. I'll get to that in just a second. The next one is the releases, which are the timings for when we would be moving the water back into the river. And of course, you see that in the June, July, August, September, October, as late as November. And that's depicting our operations there. You might notice to the right, the peaks in the wetter years in the purple, that's all three with the bigger reclamation participation. Reclamation has a bigger demand almost every year. And so with that, that's why you're seeing those increases in the annual average deliveries, is because of the reclamation participation. Next slide, please. Climate change, it's always nice to be able to say if you're going to build a billion-dollar project that it's going to get better as the climate changes, and that's exactly what's forecasted here and demonstrated here. I think these are probably understated relative to the actual conditions. Likely the modeling that we have isn't really capturing all of the variability and extremes that we're going to be seeing, but definitely seeing the model outputs improving as the climate changes is very reassuring to the investors. Next slide, please. These are a couple slides about things that might be of interest, particularly to you. Folsom Storage, we do see some improvements end of year, end of September storage in Folsom through the modeling. Of course, that depends on reclamation's operations, seeing similar improvements in Shasta. I didn't mention earlier, but we would be coordinating with reclamation on securing additional cold water in Shasta for improving the salmon fishery. That is underway, and that is analyzed in our project, but good to see here the Folsom improvements as a result of the sites project. Next slide. What this is illustrating are the flows in the Sacramento River at Freeport. You do see a little bit of shaving, a very little bit of shaving off the peaks in the wetter periods, and then a little bit of improvement there in the drier periods. And this is very helpful conditions to the river, and we've structured our diversions in a way that we're not impacting the river in a meaningful way during those peak periods of flow. Next slide, please. I'll conclude there, and happy to open it up for any questions or comments that anybody has.
Thank you, Jerry. That's really great. Are there any questions from the audience? Don't be shy. Jerry, I have a question. This appears to be really helpful for the American River folks. What can we do to be helpful to you?
I think the most important thing is to get the word out, to let folks know. You all have your different constituencies out there. You know, there are some folks that are concerned about things, particularly about the diversion criteria in the river, effects on the Trinity River, maybe some local concerns in the Delta. Even as far as associating the project with the tunnels, which, by the way, all of our modeling is done without the tunnel project. and just letting folks know, that this is a project that we need to do, letting folks know this is a project that's being done in a responsible way, protective of the species and the river system, and just being a supporter that way. The other thing is, I think that we need to be working together to have conversations with the Bureau about their management of their facilities and their coordinated operations with sites, and performing all of that in a way that it allows us all to get better together, and for that to happen in a way that spreads the benefits to the reclamation operations across the state and doesn't necessarily focus those benefits in one region over another. So that's what I would say to that.
Jim, this is Tony. I have a question. Are you wanting us to use chat box or just speak out loud? What's the preference there?
Okay, so Tony, we're going to do a couple questions in the chat log real quick, and then we'll come to your question. So Rob Roscoe has a question, okay, and that is any concerns with potential opposition to water rights application and the effects on project schedule?
Oh, of course. We would be irresponsible if we weren't concerned about our water rights application. We're doing a lot of work right now to talk to the various parties and reassure them that our analysis and our operations are being done in a way that aren't going to affect others. We're only taking water in the wettest of periods after all of the other demands and needs are met. And probably foremost of all of those potential concerned parties would be the reclamation and DWR, and we're already engaged in conversations with them about coordinating our operations and providing assurances that anything we do will not have an effect on them.
Thank you. Tony Ferenzi, if you could ask your question, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you for making sure we're following order there. First, I wanted to say thank you, just from the American River region and from PCWA as a member in this project for kind of talking about Bureau engagement. That is something that's been discussed amongst us as partners in this project recently, and so we appreciate you kind of bringing that up. I just wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about kind of the impacts of the project, the reservoir being downsized a little bit. It's perhaps everyone, we all sort of exaggerate things, or we all get disappointed when impacts like that to a great project like this happen. But you made me feel better about it, that the project still is quite feasible and still has a lot of merit, even though it's been, shrunken a little bit. So could you just talk a little bit more about your feelings about the impacts of it having to be downsized?
Sure, Tony, that's a really important point and probably a good clarification for folks to understand. We downsized the reservoir from 1.8 million acre feet to 1.5 million acre feet. And the main reason for that downsizing is to better align that size with the conveyance capability. So really what was driving that was what could we actually divert out of the river safely and protective of species. Probably most relevant to the right sizing is the elimination of the Delavan Pipeline. That was a new diversion point, a new release point that eliminates basically 2,000 CFS of capacity to get water in and out of the reservoir. So without that capacity to get it in and out of the reservoir, you don't need as big of a reservoir. Now, having been in an agency that had expanded its reservoir once and is looking at expanding it a second time, expansions are not off the table. Okay, they're always out there. They're always possible, and a lot of times you have to look at these projects, these huge 100-year projects, and say, what can we actually get built, afford, and get permitted, and do that, and know that if in the future conditions present themselves to where you need to, expand, add the conveyance, that you can do that. But, so we had to take it off the table to get to something we could get built today, but it's not necessarily off the table forever and ever.
Jerry, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to the progression of the site's reservoir and its eventual completion. Again, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your time. Next up is James Corliss, Executive Director of Sacog. James, would you please go on webcam and introduce yourself? And we made you a presenter this morning, so I think we'll be able to get you to control your slideshow.
Okay, can you hear me, Jim?
I can.
Great. All right. Sorry, folks. I'm a Zoom person for the last 12 months, so just trying to make sure I can work the go-to meeting here. And I may need help on the slide advancing, Jim, but that's okay.
No problem. I'll bring it up. So go ahead and introduce yourself again, James, and we'll bring up your presentation.
Sure. Well, thanks so much, and thanks for the invitation to be here this morning. I'm James Corliss. I'm the Executive Director of the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, or Sacog. I hope you know who we are, but if you don't, we are the Council of Governments in the 6-county Greater Sacramento region, representing 22 cities in the 6 counties. It's Sacramento, Yolo, Yuba Sutter, and El Dorado and Placer. And somewhat unique, actually, to my level of agency, regional planning, we have every single jurisdiction sit around our boardroom table twice a month to hash out all kinds of things. Largely, people think of Sacog as a transportation agency, and it's true. Those are the resources that we have probably very good access to, and we're just about to award almost $200 million in terms of transportation projects coming up in the next couple of months. But we also play a very important role on the region's growth, land use, housing, economic development, mostly through our local governments and advising them. But as I hope you'll see from this presentation, we have an increasing number of our own regional goals, but also state and federal mandates to meet a lot of climate goals in our 6-county region. And increasingly, and I think maybe some of you might be familiar with our Rural Urban Connection Strategy, or RUCS, where I know we did a lot of water work in the last decade. But increasingly, we are really digging in on how do we make sure we have a balanced growth and development portfolio in the next couple of decades. So I'm gonna get us to, if I can get the next slide, that would be great. Okay, one of our requirements from the state of California is under a bill called SB 375, passed in 2008, and it really was a landmark bill that puts a lot of requirements on us as a regional planning agency to show a significant reduction in carbon emissions, greenhouse gas reduction from transportation purposes. And how we do this, so you may think, when I say that, you may think, well, electric vehicles, zero emission trucks and buses, public transportation, and that's true. Those are all really important strategies. But interestingly, as this graphic is trying to show, actually a significant portion of this region's pathway towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions is actually a land use and growth and housing strategy. And it is about trying to get more housing in particular to happen where there are shorter vehicle trips, and where we actually have the existing infrastructure for public transportation, trails, etc. So next slide. There we go. So one of the ways that we, as I said, we have a land use strategy to really achieve our reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and I really want to put a very fine point on this because it's very important. This is not simply or only about getting people to ride a bus or a train or walk or ride your bike, or frankly now telework, right? Telework actually now, of course, has emerged as a really important transportation strategy. But it's also around making sure, as I said earlier, that we can actually encourage growth and development in areas where if people are driving, and they will drive, they're driving shorter trips. They're not commuting an hour and a half. They are, and this slide here is a really important slide because this is very data driven. It's keyed to a lot of our, not just our travel models, but our existing transportation surveys, telephone surveys, looking at big data. This is our long-range plan for the year 2040, and if we can achieve what we call our SCS, our Sustainable Community Strategy, you can see all the areas in green, and there's lots of them, are the places that we will actually have a below regional average levels of driving. So where people do jump in a vehicle and drive, we know that they're not going to drive as far. And I think this is a great slide because it shows this is not just about getting lots of infill development in downtown Sacramento. It is actually about a sort of a suburban revitalization and infill strategy, and even a small city. You look at Yuba City and Marysville. That is so green because if you're in Yuba City and Marysville, you have a lot of stuff right there. It's a very self-contained Twin City region. And so we want to see more growth there. We want to see more housing and commercial development. Next slide. I want to really be clear in this, our strategy, and it really dates back to the blueprint. If folks on the call today know, one of the hallmarks of really Sacog's growth as I think a national leader in land use and sustainable development was this blueprint, the voluntary program and project from 2002 to 04, where what we looked at the futures, the possible futures of our 6-county region, and they looked really bleak. They looked bad. Our traffic congestion numbers were skyrocketing. Our air pollution numbers were terrible. Our greenhouse gas emissions were through the roof. And so it really was a wake-up call for the region. And what we realized is we need a more balanced approach to growth. And these colors in this map really suggest that balance. And that really is in the bright red areas. Those are really the high density, high intensity kind of infill development. In the gray, those are really our existing communities, and there's still a lot of important infill development in those gray areas and those suburban areas that are a little further away from the downtowns and suburban cores. And then in our purple, those are the developing communities, and those are our greenfields. It's kind of like you have an investment portfolio. We need a balance in all three of those if we're going to achieve not just our greenhouse gas goals, but really all of our regional goals. And the problem we have is in particular in those red areas and in the gray areas, our financial incentives are all skewed. They are out of whack. And we are not seeing the type of infill development and revitalization that we need to see. So next slide. And again, this just really shows you the existing urbanized footprint. And the point is, if we have 3 buckets, sort of high intensity, center and corridor, infill in those red areas in the previous slide, but also our established communities, we need to see 2/3 of our future growth in this urbanized footprint. And we're having a little bit of a pickup the last couple of years in terms of the permits pulled in these green areas, but not nearly enough. So next slide. So what do we do about this? We have very, as I said, very strict greenhouse gas targets that we've got to meet from the state of California. We are looking to partner with the state. We're trying to go for state funding and state investment to actually spark infill development in these areas. On the local side, I mentioned we have 28 local governments. Our local governments have stepped up and actually identified and nominated what we call green zones. This is a program we're calling Green Means Go, and I want to emphasize the name there says it all, which is if there is an environmental benefit, then we need to accelerate this kind of development. We want to streamline it. We want to green light, right? The development that actually has the environmental benefits. And so this is really taking the state of California at their word on our climate ambition and our climate goals, but in some ways is saying, hey, we need you to partner with us at the local level. And we have 23 cities and counties, those little pinpoints there in yellow, that have stepped up and have identified these infill areas that are actually kind of sitting and they are ripe for redevelopment, they are ripe for reinvestment, but they're sitting there, and we haven't seen that activity even in the relatively strong kind of housing economy we've had the last few years. Next slide. So our Green Means Go is a place-based investment strategy, and I just talked a lot about, and I will continue to just kind of hit on that first bucket there, infill development. I want to make sure that it's understood. We also have a complementary set of investments on transportation and also on electrification. So we want to go big on zero emission vehicles. We want to be a test bed for the state of California. We want to be a national leader. But the place, and we have access to some resources in the travel option bucket and the electrification or zero emission bucket. But what we don't really have is the resources on infill development. And partly that's because there's lots of reasons, fiscalization of land use, but also the loss of redevelopment back a decade ago was a huge blow to our cities and counties. That really was a financing tool that helped a lot of those infill projects. Next slide. So there's many barriers to these kinds of this kind of infill development: construction costs, CEQA, lots of local requirements. But the big one there, and I want to draw your attention to this, given the audience here on the lower left-hand side, is the water and sewer upgrades, the utility upgrades that are needed. A lot of our older suburban areas, think old commercial corridors, these arterial corridors, they are actually ripe for, and they're getting a lot of interest in them in terms of putting some multifamily housing in there. But the infrastructure is not sized appropriately. And this is the rub, we can't actually make it pencil for developers to come in and do an area-wide upgrade like that, right? So we've got to figure out a way to do those infrastructure upgrades. We can't make the developer pay for it because they can't make the project pencil. So we need money for that lower left-hand orange box, which is, I hope, where many of you come in. Okay, next slide. Here's our what we can offer and what we are offering to a lot of our local governments. They've nominated those green zones. We have lots of resources, toolkits, technical assistance, and we now actually have some planning funds from the state of California, that yellow circle there. But they're planning funds, which is great. And now what we're after is capital money, infrastructure money to actually do these water, sewer, utility upgrades. We have a bill, it's AB 1209, it's been introduced, that's AB 1209. Assemblymember McCarty has introduced a bill, and in the budget, we're asking for $100 million, which is a huge ask. We're very aware of that, but it is actually the genuine ask about shovel-ready projects that are ready to go in all of these green zones. And that's where that triple play comes in. It's a housing play, it's a climate play, and frankly, it's an economic and jobs play. But so we are active in the state legislature. We would love your support on AB 1209 if I'm drawing and connecting the dots for you this morning. We are hoping to get money in the budget and really to be a pilot program for other regions in the state. Next slide. And here's the reason why we need this funding. Many folks at the state level will say, well, look, there's lots of grant programs, you know, why don't you and your cities and counties apply for things like this Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program? A lot of this is the cap and trade money that comes from the state of California. Well, this slide tells you why. our recent multifamily projects in our 6-county region are 52 units an acre, and that's wonderful density on multifamily, much higher than the existing average. But the awards, we are competing against the Bay Area, San Francisco, LA, and San Diego. We just can't compete. We are not competitive because the criteria are set for coastal economies, not for inland California. So we're trying to regionalize a pot of money to bring it down to the regional level, to spark this kind of infill housing, and really to become a pilot project for other regions in the state. I'm actually gonna, I'm mindful of time. I'm gonna end there. I hope I've piqued people's interest. We would love your support again on AB 1209, but also in some of our green zones, and we can share maps with you as we go. I think there's a great partnership that we might be able to have to figure out how might we get, for instance, if there's a federal infrastructure stimulus, and we've worked with some of you on this, right? How might we get shovel-ready projects in these green zones to be eligible for some of the stimulus funds? And I'm hoping that we'll be either through our AB 1209 bill or even some other bills this year at the state level, there will also be some infrastructure funds that will actually help upgrade some of our utility systems and water systems and everything else. So thanks for your time, and I'm very happy to entertain any questions.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Hi, can you hear me, Jim?
Yes, I can.
I had one question for you. You mentioned redevelopment. Is there any effort to bring back redevelopment funding?
Great question. I know there have been efforts to bring back versions of redevelopment, so-called redevelopment 2.0. They have not gotten very far, honestly. And the other thing that so the answer is yes, but they've got a very steep hill to climb. And I think if we see anything come back, and as I said, AB 1209 it's both a grant program we're trying to stand up, but also a loan program. But perhaps there are some financing tools, right, that we could work with at the state level. If there are versions of redevelopment that are a little more narrowly focused in terms of, again, EIFDs and the like, perhaps we can actually present ourselves as a bit of a pilot region. We can allow the state to test some new tools that maybe look like redevelopment, accomplish the same things that I think are going to have a bit of a narrower focus. So we've been hopeful on that for quite some time, but I don't see it happening this year.
James, we have another question in the chat box. How far will $100 million go towards the implementation? And do we have a sense of how much these $100 million or the $100 million would go towards water and wastewater upgrades?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I can tell you, because I've got a very data-driven staff who's very quantitative. If we could get $100 million in to upgrade our water, sewer, utility systems, we believe, and again, these are not parcel by parcel projects, which is kind of how the state of California approaches this. They're really area-wide upgrades. That in our plan, very specifically with our local governments, that could really unlock potential for 17,000 housing units. So it's a really big deal. And we thought when we got into this that we would actually hear that CEQA was the problem, and not that we don't want some more streamlining for, again, Green Means Go, to accelerate some of these projects and maybe get some more neg decks on them. But it was amazing to us how much of that 100 million was actually the water sewers. I don't have a percentage for you, but I can tell you that, you know, from downtown Sacramento to Stockton Boulevard to Rancho Cordova to downtown Marysville, it's kind of remarkable how much of a water sewer focus there is for those funds. And to be clear, our actual number that we think we need to do all of this is 100 million a year for 4 years. Are we going to get that? I don't know, but that's the actual number. So we're hoping we can get something this year that we can even begin to do some of these projects with.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions, and then I think that's all the time we have. Mr. Ferenzi has a question.
Okay, Sorry to be stealing questions this morning. Thank you, James. Good presentation. And this kind of relates to Ryan's question. A lot of us are looking for funding sources for kind of renewal and replacement of our old infrastructure in those downtown kind of areas that you mentioned. Have you looked at aligning these sort of infill development plans with the opportunities where we're already going to be working on those pipes? And so some of the cost to the developers could be defrayed by the fact that we'd already have to fix them. And then, to boot, we're out looking for, stimulus money or that kind of thing to work on some of that. So,
yeah, it's a great question, Tony. And and again, thanks for being part of that stimulus report that we all put together last summer. We need to do more, right? And that's, I think, part of the reason Jim gave me the invite this morning is I just think we have been too siloed. What I'd love to do, if I can, is share somehow the maps of where these green zones are. There's 23 cities and counties. And I would love to get a conversation going with those of you that serve those areas, right? So we can really drill down to know, what are you already planning? What kinds of funding are you already going for? And so we don't step on each other's toes or duplicate efforts, but B, we can also join forces, right, in some ways. So that really is in some ways the next step for us, is really we've got sample projects. As I mentioned, the 17,000 housing units come off just a sort of a sample of projects that actually add up to 112 million that are shovel ready. But we'd love to dig a little bit deeper with all of you.
Thank you. One last question, and this is truly a transportation question. Has there been any consideration to providing commuter bus service into downtown Sacramento from outlying areas?
Boy, I could give you a whole other presentation on that one. So actually, some of our most successful transit service in this region, and I don't mean to say that there's not lots of good bright spots, but our express bus system is, before the pandemic, some of it was standing room only. And I'm a huge believer that we could actually double down on a regional network of express buses. We're working with Caltrans right now to extend the HOV lanes, maybe even make them toll lanes on all of our freeways, where buses could actually zip by all the traffic. That, I think, is our transit system of the future, our high-tech, modern buses, skipping by all the traffic jams and getting people where they need to go. So thanks for the question.
All right, James, thank you for your time today. This is a really interesting presentation, and it's really good to see what Sacog needs to move the region forward. Thank you once again.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Next up, we have Tony Ferenzi and Charles Duncan. Tony Ferenzi, again, Manager of Strategic Affairs for the Placer County Water Agency. Charles Duncan, CEO of West Yost Associates, a consulting firm specializing in water and wastewater and all sorts of other engineering services. Tony and Charles, please take it over.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And Charles, I was going to have you share your screen, but I'm prepared to do it on my end if that's your preference. Are you there?
Oh no, Tony, it says he's offline. So we're going to bring up your PowerPoint presentation while we restore his connection. And
do you want me to just bring it up, Jim?
Sure, I made you an organizer.
Okay, I can do it.
Jim, this is Charles. Sorry about that. Had a little bit of a technical difficulty. I think I'm back online now. Should be under my name.
Okay, Charles, I'll just, since I've already done it, I'll go ahead and advance the slides. So, very good. Okay, I think we're all set here. As Jim said, I'm Tony Ferenzi with Placer County Water Agency. I've been involved in the River Arc project for about 5 years. It's been a pleasure to sort of reimagine this project. Charles is going to go over the long-term history of it. And I am presenting with Charles from West Yost. I'm sorry, my screen's doing something kind of weird here. Hopefully that's stabilized there. I'll let Charles sort of introduce the details when he introduces himself. But let me go on here. The River Arc project will construct a regional water treatment plant on the Sacramento River. This project will use existing screens. These are owned by Natomas Central Mutual Water Company, and it will tie into existing regional pipelines with new regional pipelines. So it's very much a regional treated surface water supply project. The project's named River Arc because, as I'm going to go over on the next slide, our region is heavily reliant on supplies from the American River side of our watershed. And this project looks to seek water supply from the Sacramento River. So we thought it was fitting to kind of name it River Arc, where it's arcing these two surface water supplies across the landscape of our region. It also just so happens that in arcing across that landscape, these two surface water supplies kind of will overlie the groundwater basins below us. And we'll get into the meaning of that in a few minutes. But I'd also like to say everyone remembers the name River Arc, which is good. I'd like to acknowledge my cost share partners, Sacramento County Water Agency, the City of Sacramento, and California American Water Company. They're all current cost share partners driving this project forward along with PCWA. I'm the speaker because PCWA is kind of the administrative lead on this, hiring the consultants and so forth. There's a host of other sort of past and future partners. This project's in a developmental stage, and Charles is going to cover that in a minute. I'd like to acknowledge the consulting team, West Jost and Associates, who's doing engineering and project management, ICF for their work on the environmental stuff, and MBK, who's just beginning on our modeling. So those are the consulting team. And then last but not least, I'd like to acknowledge and thank and praise Natomas Central Mutual Water Company for being open to exploring shared use of their existing intake screens. It's very interest-based, it's very much regional thinking, and they've been a great partner and also a patient partner. This project has been moving a little bit slowly, and they've been patiently kind of cooperating through that process. Use of those existing intake screens is absolutely an X factor in the feasibility of River Arc. So on this slide, I want to talk a little bit about the high-level sort of merits of the River Arc project. Why are we doing it? So what you see here is a map of our region. The Sacramento River and the American River, we're all very familiar with that. I probably don't need to go into the details there. In white, it's an area that's somewhat kind of new. It's been recently defined in the last few years. It's called the American River Basin. It's our watershed of the American River combined with the two groundwater basins under the Sacramento area. So it's kind of the footprint of our water resources, if you will. And then shown in color, you see all of us as water purveyors. Those of us that are getting our primary supplies off of the American River, we are shown in orange. And those of you who get your primary supplies off the Sacramento River, you're shown in blue. And then the City of Sacramento, it just so happens, I think they're about 50-50. We couldn't decide what color to make them, so you see what you see there. Diversions, primary diversions are also shown with the appropriate colors as well. And the point of all this is to illustrate, as water purveyors in the American River region, our heavy reliance and current sort of state of using water from the American River side of our water system. That reliance on the American River side of things doesn't exactly comport with the distribution of flows that we have in the system, or that come down through the system. So here's a pie chart that shows the distribution at the confluence of the Sacramento and the American Rivers as they come together, and it's showing that 85% of the system flows come from the Sacramento River, only 15% of the flows come from the American River. Our reliance on the American River also doesn't comport with the fact that the lower American River is home to critical spawning and rearing habitat that is unfortunately threatened and distressed by lack of cold water supplies that are coming out of the American River Basin. And so that is exactly why back in 2000, when we executed the Waterform Agreement, this project was born out of that process where the water purveyors agreed to pursue its next generation of surface water supplies to come off the Sacramento River rather than continuing to look to the American River. And that pursuit is good for the environment. It's actually also good for water supply resilience. There's other merits to the River Arc project, just kind of summarize them. It's a regional project. And as a person that tries to drive both local and regional projects forward, I can tell you it is getting very, very hard with current cost structure to implement a project of this scale all by yourself as a water agency. We're stronger together. We share in the benefits, we share in the capital outlay, and we also advocate together. And so it being a regional project is absolutely a plus. And that's enhanced by the fact that we have a partner in Natomas Central willing to possibly share the use of their existing screens. That absolutely increases the feasibility. This project is good for water banking that we're proposing in the region. It's ideally situated right over the area, critical areas of the groundwater basin off of the Sacramento River. And as I said, the pipelines connecting this surface water supply with the supplies from the American River, they go right over the top of critical areas of the groundwater basin. And finally, it's good for climate change. Currently in our conjunctive use.
Take $15 an hour, so this is going to happen. Yeah.
Can I get that person to mute themselves, please?
Hi, everybody. This Bill's on also.
Okay.
Hey, could you mute, please? Thank you. Where was I going with that? Oh, this project is good for climate change. So currently in our conjunctive use program, our access to surface water supplies to sort of bank water off of the American River is about 2 and 3 years with current climate conditions. Our climate change study that we just completed recently predicts that frequency of access to surface water for banking purposes will degrade to about 1 in 3 years, so cut in half. We don't see near the sensitivity or the impacts of diverting for conjunctive use operations off the Sacramento River. And so because of that, it would provide much greater banking opportunities off of that source of surface water as well. So it is good for climate change. And with that, I think that's a nice background. I'm going to tee Charles up, but I'd like to just say thank you for hearing about the River Arc project. So with that, Charles, are you ready to go?
I am. Excellent. Can you hear me okay, Tony?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right. Excellent. All right. Well, the River Arc project has a long history in the region, starting when it was called Sacramento Water Supply Reliability Project. It was identified in the Waterform Agreement in the early 2000s as a new facility off the Sacramento River to benefit the American River Basin. In 2009, for various reasons, the project was put on hold, and then really until 2014 when it was rebooted with a partner MOU. A lot of the agencies on the phone call today were interviewed and participated in the reboot of this regional project in 2014. And after the phase 1 planning report was complete, the River Arc project started the phase 2 planning effort, which is what we're going to talk a little bit more about today. Next slide, Tony. Great. Today's project partners include California American Water, the City of Sacramento, Placer County Water Agency, and Sacramento County Water Agency. But there are additional stakeholders that are interested in or have been part of the progress of the project previously, and those include Sac Suburban Water District, Carmichael Water District, Citrus Heights Water District, City of Folsom, City of Roseville, El Dorado County Water Agency, and Rio Linda, Alberta Community Water District. Next slide, Tony.
I'm trying here. Give me a second. I think I might need to. There you go. Thank you.
All right, excellent. So what does this project look like? Well, it starts at the existing Natomas Mutual's Pritchard Lake intake off the Sacramento River. Raw water will be pumped to a new regional treatment plant. On the screen, when you see those yellow lines, those represent both the raw and finished water lines. It's the new treatment plant is that kind of darkish rectangle, gray rectangle in the Rio Linda, Alberta Community Water District service area. And from there, it's going to move treated water south to the city of Sacramento, north and east to PCWA's service area, and then eventually is envisioned to connect to the cooperative pipeline, which is shown here in the yellow dashed line. Ultimately, this provides us the ability and flexibility to move treated water throughout the region to provide the most benefit to our region as well as to all of your customers. Next slide, Tony. So I wanted to just provide this picture of the Pritchard Lake intake. And as Tony mentioned, this is a big differentiator for the project, and especially for the reboot of this project, because it's already constructed and it's currently diverting water from the Sacramento River today. So it's a big part of why this project is so feasible. Next slide. So in order to position this project for potential funding, a preliminary evaluation was performed on the existing outputs of the CalSim modeling results. The CVP facilities and the Sacramento diversions were evaluated with and without the River Arc project. The lower Sacramento River diversions under the River Arc project would increase flows in the lower American River and increase the operational flexibility of the CVP. So what it really provided for was an increase in system-wide CVP water supply, enhance the lower American River flows for fish habitat and spawning, and improve the temperature and management on both the American and Sacramento rivers. This preliminary evaluation indicated that River Arc will capitalize on excess conditions in the Sacramento River, and the resulting increase in Folsom Lake storage would increase overall annual water supply in 13% of all years, 25% of dry years, and 30% of critically dry years. Next slide, Tony. So this slide presents the River Arc project objectives and benefits. With California potentially facing another critically dry year, having a project that enhances supply reliability and drought resiliency for the region is really key. The idea that it also enhances stream flow on the lower American River, protects the region's valuable urban rivers and watersheds, certainly enhances the regional groundwater sustainability and replenishment, benefits to the Sacramento Regional Water Bank we're going to discuss in just a minute. But it also, again, provides this statewide system operations, both flexibility as far as and also reliability. It improves CVP operations managing cold pool flows in Folsom, the Lower American River, Shasta, and the Delta. Next slide, Tony. So one of the other benefits of the River Arc project is that it is complementary to other regional projects and studies, including the Sacramento Regional Water Bank and the American River Basin study. Next slide, Tony. So speaking of the Regional Water Bank, as part of Phase 2 planning, we wanted to provide some range of the potential benefits of the River Arc project to the water bank. And I know I broke the cardinal rule on presenting and slapping a bunch of numbers up here, but I am hoping they provide more answers and questions about the benefits to the water bank. We've broken down the funding partners into known specific plans and planning areas, with the second column on this table representing their estimated demands. The third column represents the estimated portion of those demands that we could assume either historically or in the future could be supplied by groundwater. And then the fourth column represents potential annual groundwater contribution in a wet year. Two things to point out here with this number is that for the city of Sacramento, the potential annual groundwater contribution is equal to approximately 50% of historical groundwater use. The other 50% has already previously been accounted for in RWA estimates for the groundwater bank. And then about 20 years of data indicates that the use of about 14,000 acre feet in Placer County, but in later years, it was closer to 12.5. So we assumed the 12.5 number for Western Placer with no groundwater contribution assumed for Roseville. And then finally, the fifth column presents the average annual contribution over 10 years. So our preliminary evaluation indicated a potential annual groundwater contribution to storage from the River Arc project of between 52,000 acre feet and 30,000 acre feet, really depending on the hydrologic year. Next slide, Tony.
Charles, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I do feel like it's appropriate to say, why do we have Sutter Point on there, which is will be supplied by Golden State Water Company. They're not currently a River Arc partner. They're looking at alternatives for surface water supply to that project. River Arc could be an alternative to that. And just in consultation with them, it seemed appropriate to put them as a possibility. And it's why we showed them as sort of separate from the others. And so sorry to interrupt and say that, but I just wanted people to understand that.
No, that's a great clarifier. Thank you, Tony. All right, so we can't talk about this project without discussing timing and cost. So phase one will be operational sometime after 2025 at a cost of approximately $140 million. And I want to emphasize when you look at that cost that phase one includes both the raw water and some finished water pipelines sized to deliver 70 MGD or the build out of phase two. So that's important to recognize with that cost. Phase two is going to happen sometime between 2035 and 2040, and phase three somewhere north of 2050. The ultimate projects will bring 185 MGD of treated water to the region at a cost of approximately $1.4 billion. Next slide. So with a project at this potential cost, we are doing all we can to identify potential grants to assist with the progression of phase one and the overall funding for the project. So the project funding partners recently received the Bureau of Reclamation's Water Management Operations Pilot Grant. MBK is working with us and was selected and under contract, and they're currently finishing the scoping of the calcium modeling efforts to demonstrate benefits to the CVP. We're also awaiting response on the Wildlife Conservation Board Prop 1 Streamflow Enhancement Grant, and that will help with funding for basically the CEQA and NEPA process for the project. Next slide. So why is River Arc a topic today? Well, there's opportunities that exist right now. I think the political push for regional solutions, all of us have felt this in our roles with our agencies that we represent, that people are looking for more regional type projects. Certainly climate change resiliency is also not going away, and with the potential for another critically dry year in California, the River Arc project is really ripe for discussion right now. The use of the Pritchard Lake diversion structure, as I mentioned, and what Tony said, is really a game changer for the viability of this project now. And not only is the regional project better suited to receive funding, there's also the scale of economy from a regional constructed project. So we get kind of two bonuses there. And then finally, with the current Water Forum 2.0 discussions that are happening now, River Arc is still a key element of the sustainability of the Lower American River. So again, thank you so much for attending the discussion today. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Tony or to Jim to please solicit questions.
Yeah, Jim, I think that concludes everything. So we'll follow your lead.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the audience? I don't hear any. Please don't be shy. I have a question, Tony.
You bet.
This project has been long envisioned as a project. It was actually written even into the Water Forum Agreement, the original Water Forum Agreement. How do you see this playing out in the future as important to the progression of that agreement as it goes through its second phase.
Yeah. Well, I think with the conversations that are going on right now and the understanding that we have on the habitat of the lower American River, the need for river arc, and it wasn't called river arc in Waterform 1.0, but I'm calling it that now. It hasn't gone away, and I'd actually say it's expanded. The American River Basin study that had evaluated climate change impacts and adaptation strategies really, the results of that study really bode well for river arc as a solution to habitat of the lower American River. So in that sense, I think it's sort of time to redouble our efforts. And I would also just elaborate on that with one more thing. The project's always been important. We tried to pursue it in lockstep with the city of Sacramento right after the execution of the Waterform agreement. The recession and then the drought just absolutely changed water use patterns and economy and that kind of thing. And so it was appropriate to put the project on ice for a little while. Even if we were to have, another drought, which we will, and eventually, not necessarily this year, that's yet to be seen, but or another recession, I don't see. We have already absorbed the water use savings from the last recession and the drought, and I can't see that paradigm happening or playing out again where another drought or recession would delay the need for river arc. So a combination of what we're seeing as far as river impacts on the lower American River with the need for the water supply, I think it's time to redouble our efforts and get this thing done.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, so that concludes our coffee and chat this morning. I want to thank you all for joining us, and I also want to thank our speakers for presenting today. It was a really informative set of presentations dealing with projects that add resiliency to our region. Thank you all. Have a good morning.